The GPS signal cut out somewhere around Red Deer, but I kept driving north anyway. The job posting had been specific about the location, 90 kilometers past the last gas station. Follow the gravel road until you see the derricks. What it hadn't mentioned was how the landscape would gradually empty out, like civilization was slowly leaking away through a hole in the world. My pickup kicked up a cloud of dust as I pulled into what passed for a parking area near the main office. October in Alberta meant gray skies that pressed down like a concrete ceiling, and the wind carried the smell of diesel fuel mixed with something sharper I couldn't place. Pine, maybe, or just the scent of a place where winter came early and stayed late. The camp spread out in front of me like a collection of metal boxes someone had dropped and forgotten to arrange properly, prefab buildings connected by gravel paths, a few scattered trailers, and beyond it all, the forest. Dense spruce and pine that seemed to lean inward, as if the trees were trying to get a better look at what we were doing out here. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked toward the building marked office in faded yellow letters. The door opened before I could knock. Carl Cook? The man who stepped out was shorter than me, maybe 5'8", with the kind of stocky build that came from decades of real work. His handshake was firm enough to crack knuckles, but his dark eyes held something I couldn't read. Not unfriendly exactly, more like he was measuring me for something. Mike Nunez, site supervisor. He looked me over, taking in my work clothes and steel-toed boots. You made good time. How was the drive? Long. GPS gave up about 2 hours ago. Yeah, they always do. Mike stepped back, gesturing for me to follow him inside. Cell service is spotty too. Satellite phone in the office if you need to call home. The office was what you'd expect. Metal desk, filing cabinets, a coffee maker that looked like it had survived several wars. Maps covered one wall, showing pipeline routes and drilling sites marked with different colored pins. Some of the pins were black, which seemed ominous for reasons I couldn't explain. Coffee? Mike was already pouring 2 cups from a pot that smelled like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. Thanks. I took the cup, grateful for the warmth. So, what's the setup here? The posting mentioned equipment operation and general maintenance. That's right. We run a small crew, keep things efficient. You'll be working with our heavy machinery, excavators, drilling equipment, that sort of thing. Mike sat behind his desk, but his posture stayed formal, like this was still an interview. Your references were solid. Supervisor at the Syncrude site said you were reliable, followed safety protocols. I try to keep all my fingers attached. That got a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good policy. Speaking of which, let me show you to your quarters, then we'll go over some camp-specific guidelines. We walked back outside, following a gravel path toward a long, low building marked C, in the same faded paint as the office sign. The wind had picked up, carrying that sharp smell again, and I caught myself glancing toward the tree line. The forest was maybe 50 yards from the nearest building, close enough that I could see individual branches swaying. Building C, rooms 1 through 12, Mike said, pulling out a keyring. You're in room 7. Shared bathroom at the end of the hall, but most guys prefer the facilities in the main building. He unlocked a door halfway down the corridor. Cafeteria's open 6 to 8 for breakfast, noon to 2 for lunch, 6 to 8 for dinner. Kitchen staff keeps coffee going around the clock. The room was basic but clean. Single bed, small dresser, desk and chair, window facing the forest. Everything you needed and nothing you didn't. I dropped my bag on the bed and looked around. Laundry facilities? Main building, basement level, quarters every Sunday. Mike reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Before I forget, these are our camp rules. Every worker gets a copy and everyone follows them. No exceptions. The paper felt old, yellowed around the edges with dark stains that could have been coffee or motor oil. Or something else. The bottom corner looked like someone had wiped blood on it, then tried to clean it off without much success. I unfolded it carefully. Camp rules, mandatory compliance. 1. Do not leave camp boundaries between midnight and 3 a.m. for any reason. If you must go outside during these hours, stay within the lit areas near the main buildings. 2. If you hear crying sounds from the forest, close your windows immediately and do not look outside until the sounds stop. 3. Never answer persistent knocking at your door during night hours. If knocking continues for more than 5 minutes, contact the night supervisor. 4. Do not respond to whistling from the forest. Continue your work and avoid looking toward the source of the sound. 5. Do not acknowledge any animals that display unusual behavior. Walk past them without making eye contact or sudden movements. I read through the list twice, waiting for the punchline. When I looked up, Mike was watching me with that same unreadable expression. This is a joke, right? Some kind of hazing thing for new guys? Mike's face didn't change. Do I look like I'm joking? Well, no, but I gestured at the paper. Crying sounds from the forest? Don't acknowledge weird animals. This reads like something from a horror movie. 3 workers who ignored those rules didn't make it past their first month. Mike's voice was flat, matter of fact. Take them seriously. He turned and walked away before I could ask what he meant by didn't make it past their first month. I stood in the doorway, holding the paper and watching him disappear around the corner of the main building. The rest of the day passed in a blur of orientation, safety briefings, equipment demonstrations, paperwork that seemed designed to absolve the company of responsibility for pretty much everything short of acts of God. I met a few other workers during lunch, but conversations stayed surface level. Nobody mentioned the rules. By evening, I was exhausted. The cafeteria served decent enough food, and I grabbed a beer from the vending machine before heading back to Building C. My room felt smaller with the lights on, and the window seemed larger, like it was trying to draw my attention to whatever was happening outside. I unpacked my clothes, set up my alarm clock, and placed the rule sheet on the nightstand where I could see it. The stains looked darker under the room's fluorescent lighting. Around 10:30, I brushed my teeth and got ready for bed. Through the bathroom window, I could see the forest edge, a black wall that seemed to absorb the camp's scattered lights. No movement, no sounds except the distant hum of generators and the occasional truck engine. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A child crying, somewhere in the woods, soft at first, barely audible over the wind, then growing louder, more desperate. The sound seemed to move, circling the camp like whoever was making it couldn't find their way out of the trees. I sat up in bed, listening. The crying was clearer now. Definitely a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Lost, scared, calling for help in a voice that cut right through whatever skepticism I'd been holding on to. My first instinct was to look outside, maybe call someone. Kids didn't just wander around the wilderness at night, especially not this far from any town, but the rule sheet caught my eye, and I remembered Mike's stone, serious expression. If you hear crying sounds from the forest, close your windows immediately and do not look outside until the sounds stop. I got up and checked the window. It was already closed, but I turned the lock anyway and pulled the curtain shut. The crying continued, moving closer to my building now, right outside my window. The voice was clearer, more distinct. A little girl, sobbing and calling for her mommy. Every instinct I had screamed at me to look outside, to help, to do something. But I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to that heartbreaking sound circle my building like a lost animal. The crying went on for over an hour, sometimes fading away, before returning stronger than before. Twice, it sounded like it was coming from directly outside my door instead of the window. Then, sometime after midnight, it stopped, not gradually, not like someone walking away. It just cut off mid-sob, as if someone had flipped a switch. I lay awake until dawn, wondering what would have happened if I'd looked outside, wondering what kind of place needed rules like that, and wondering, despite everything, if I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. The rule sheet sat on my nightstand, those dark stains looking almost black in the early morning light filtering through my curtains. 3 workers who ignored the rules didn't make it past their first month. I was starting to understand that Mike hadn't been talking about quitting. I crushed my cigarette under my boot and headed back toward the drilling site, trying to shake off the memory of those crying sounds from last night. The excavator's engine noise was a blessing, loud enough to drown out any thoughts about what might be wandering around the forest edge. Mike had paired me with the day shift crew for equipment training. Standard stuff, really. Operating procedures, safety protocols, maintenance schedules, the kind of work I'd done at a dozen other sites. Except here, I caught myself checking my watch more often than usual, making sure I knew exactly what time it was. The lunch whistle couldn't come fast enough. The mess hall buzzed with conversation when I walked in, grabbing a tray and loading it with something that might have been beef stew. I spotted 2 workers at a corner table, an older guy with salt and pepper hair tied back and a woman with auburn hair who looked like she'd been doing this work longer than most. They had the kind of easy familiarity that came from surviving things together. "Mind if I sit?" I gestured to the empty chair across from them. The woman looked up from her sandwich. "Carl, right? New guy in Building C." "That's me." I set my tray down and extended my hand. "Carl Cook. Doris Lawrence. This is Jasper Woods." She had a firm handshake and direct green eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in about 3 seconds. "How's your first week treating you?" "Can't complain about the work." I took a bite of the stew, which was better than it looked. Though I have to ask, what's the deal with those camp rules? The ones about crying sounds and weird animals? Jasper's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully and exchanged a look with Doris that lasted about 2 seconds too long. "What about them?" Doris's voice had gone flat. "Come on. Whistling from the forest? Don't acknowledge unusual animal behavior?" I tried for a laugh that came out more nervous than I intended. "It reads like something from a ghost story." Doris leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You think it's funny? I think it's..." I searched for the right word. "Unusual for a work site. Let me tell you what's unusual." Doris's voice dropped low enough that I had to lean forward to hear her. "I've been at this camp for 5 years. 5 years of following those rules exactly as written. You know why I'm still here?" I shook my head. "Because my roommate Jenny thought they were bullshit too." The mess hall noise seemed to fade around our table. Jasper picked up his coffee cup but didn't drink from it, just held it like he needed something to do with his hands. Jenny was from Saskatchewan. Tough farm girl, grew up hunting with her dad. She figured she could handle anything the wilderness threw at her. Doris's eyes never left my face. Winter night, maybe 2 years ago. Someone started knocking on our door around 1 a.m. Persistent knocking, just like Rule 3 warns about. "What happened?" I told her to ignore it, reminded her about the rules. But Jenny... Doris shook her head. She said she wasn't going to hide from some drunk co-worker playing pranks. Got up and opened that door wide. I waited, but Doris just stared at her sandwich like it had personally offended her. "They found her body 2 miles into the forest the next morning," Jasper said quietly. "Face frozen in terror. No tracks leading to where she lay. No tracks leading away either." "How is that possible?" "Wrong question," Doris said. "Better question is why you're sitting here asking instead of just following the damn rules." I looked between them, searching for any sign this was some elaborate hazing ritual, but Jasper's weathered face showed nothing but tired acceptance, and Doris looked like she was remembering something that still woke her up at night. "The rules aren't suggestions," Jasper added. "They're survival instructions written in other people's blood." "You really believe that?" Jasper set down his coffee cup. "I saw a deer once, standing on its hind legs near the equipment shed watching me work. Eyes caught the light wrong, too bright, too knowing. Thing stood there for 20 minutes just staring. So, Deer do weird things sometimes. This one was smiling. The word hit me like cold water. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. Rule 5 says don't acknowledge unusual animal behavior. So I didn't look at it directly, didn't make eye contact, just kept walking toward the main building. Jasper's voice stayed level, matter of fact, but I could feel it tracking me the whole way. When I reached the door and finally turned around, it was gone. Could have been a lot of things. Doris cut me off. But it wasn't. Just like that knocking on Jenny's door wasn't some drunk coworker. Just like those crying sounds you heard last night weren't a lost child. My fork clattered against my tray. How did you know about that? Because everyone hears them their first week. Most people learn to keep their windows closed and their mouths shut. Doris leaned forward. You followed Rule 2, didn't you? Closed your windows and didn't look outside. Yeah, but then you're smarter than Jenny, smarter than Tommy Reed, who went after what he thought was a hurt dog, smarter than Marcus Chen, who answered his door because he was sure it was his buddy from the next room. Doris's voice got harder with each name. All of them thought they knew better than the rules. I pushed my tray away, appetite gone. This is insane. Sanity's a luxury we can't afford out here, Jasper said. Those rules keep you alive. Everything else is just noise. The lunch whistle blew, signaling the end of break. Around us, workers started clearing their tables and heading back to their assignments. Normal people doing normal work, like we hadn't just been discussing smiling deer and mysterious knockers. Think about it, Doris said, standing up with her tray. But don't think too hard. Curiosity kills more workers than equipment failures. I sat alone at the table for a few minutes, staring at the rule sheet I'd pulled from my pocket. The stains looked darker under the fluorescent lights, and I found myself wondering what had made them. The afternoon shift dragged. Every sound from the forest edge made me glance up from the machinery controls. Every shadow that moved wrong caught my attention. By 4 o'clock, I needed a smoke break just to clear my head. I walked around behind the maintenance shop, away from the main work area. The trees seemed closer here, though I knew that was impossible. I lit my cigarette and took a long drag, trying to process what Doris and Jasper had told me. That's when I heard it. A whistle, clear and melodic, drifting from somewhere in the forest. It started far away, barely audible over the generator noise. Then came again. Closer this time, more distinct. My first instinct was to look toward the sound, maybe call out to see if someone was in trouble. But Rule 4 flashed through my mind like a neon sign. Do not respond to whistling from the forest. The whistle came again, definitely closer now. It had a strange quality, like it was specifically meant for me. Like whoever was making it knew exactly where I stood and wanted my attention. I dropped my cigarette and stepped on it, then started walking steadily toward the nearest building. Not running. That felt like it would be wrong somehow, just walking with purpose, eyes straight ahead. The whistling followed me. It moved through the trees parallel to my path, keeping pace perfectly. In my peripheral vision, something tall shifted between the trunks. Something that moved wrong, like it had too many joints or joints in the wrong places. I reached the door to the main building and grabbed the handle. Only then did I risk a glance back toward the forest. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and the ordinary sounds of wind through branches. You're picking things up fast. I spun around to find Jasper standing behind me, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression of mild approval. Did you hear that whistling? I heard you walking away from it. Jasper made a note on his clipboard. That's what matters. But what was it? Nothing you need to know about. Jasper looked up from his paperwork. Rule 4 exists for a reason. Same as all the others. That night, I sat on my bed with the rule sheet spread out in front of me. I read each line slowly, committing every word to memory. The paper felt heavier somehow, like it carried the weight of all the people who'd learned these lessons the hard way. Outside my window, the forest was quiet. No crying sounds tonight, no mysterious whistles, just the normal darkness of a place where normal rules applied. Except they didn't. Not here. Here, the rules were different, written by people who'd paid for knowledge with their lives. People like Jenny, who'd thought she was tough enough to handle whatever came knocking. People like Tommy Reed and Marcus Chen, whose names Doris had rattled off like a casualty list. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back on my nightstand. Tomorrow I'd follow every rule exactly as written. Not because I fully believed them yet, but because the alternative was ending up as another name on someone else's list. The stains on the paper caught the lamplight, dark and permanent. Hard-won knowledge, Jasper had called it. Blood-bought wisdom that kept the living alive. I turned off the light and settled back against my pillow, finally understanding that some lessons were too expensive to learn firsthand. I checked my watch again. 2:17 a.m. The glowing numbers were becoming my best friend out here, a constant reminder of where I stood in the camp's daily rhythm. Safe hours, dangerous hours, times when the rules mattered more than breathing. The pounding on my door started like a sledgehammer to the skull. 3 sharp knocks, pause. 3 more, pause. Then an absolute barrage that made the entire door frame shake like it was about to give up and surrender. The sound cut through my sleep and launched me upright, heart hammering against my ribs. Rule 3. Never answer persistent knocking at your door during night hours. I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand, then my phone and jacket from the chair. The knocking kept going, relentless and violent, like whoever was out there planned to beat the door down one way or another. Then it stopped. Dead silence for maybe 10 seconds before a voice called through the wood. Mike Nunez's voice, clear as day, asking me to open up. Said there was an emergency meeting in the main building, needed everyone there immediately. Except Mike had flown out to Edmonton on Monday morning. Company business that would keep him away for the rest of the week. The voice kept talking, sounding exactly like Mike, explaining about equipment failures and safety protocols. Even had his slight accent, the way he pronounced certain words. If I hadn't seen him climb into that helicopter myself, I would have opened the door without thinking twice. My hand was already reaching for the doorknob when I caught myself. The window. 6-foot drop to the ground, but better than whatever was pretending to be my boss on the other side of that door. I unlocked the window as quietly as possible and pushed it open. Cold October air hit my face, carrying the smell of diesel and pine. I threw my jacket out first, then dropped my phone and flashlight into the grass below. The knocking started again, more violent than before. Wood creaked and groaned under the assault. I swung one leg over the windowsill, then the other, hanging by my hands for a second before letting go. The landing jarred my knees, but I rolled with it and came up running toward the main building. Behind me, something heavy crashed into my room with enough force to shake the ground. The night shift office was a small building attached to the main complex, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that flickered every few seconds. I burst through the door without knocking, breathing hard and probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. Jasmine Snyder glanced up from her computer screen, took in my appearance, and calmly reached for the coffee pot on her desk. "Let me guess," she said, pouring a cup. Persistent knocking followed by a familiar voice asking you to come outside? "How did you—" "Because it's Tuesday." She handed me the coffee and turned back to her computer. "Happens every few weeks. Different workers, same pattern." Her fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the security camera feed for Building C. The screen showed my hallway, empty and quiet. She scrolled back through the footage, stopping at 2:15 a.m. There was my door, solid and intact. Then 2:16, 2:17, 2:18. At 2:19, the feed showed my door hanging off its hinges, completely destroyed. Wood splinters scattered across the hallway floor, deep gouges carved into the frame. But the hallway camera showed nothing else. No sign of what could have done that kind of damage. Check this out. Jasmine switched to another angle, showing the exterior of Building C. There I was, dropping from my window and running toward the main building, but nothing else moved in the frame. No person, no animal, no explanation for the destruction happening inside. I stared at the screen, watching myself flee from something that didn't exist according to the cameras. What the hell is going on here? Jasmine leaned back in her chair and studied me over her coffee cup. How much do you really want to know? I think I've earned the right to ask questions. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing something in her mind. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick ledger, its pages yellowed and worn from handling. Camps built on old indigenous land, she said, opening the book. First drilling crew back in the 70s woke something up. Company keeps us running because the oil's too good to walk away from, but we've learned to live with whatever's out there in those trees. The ledger was full of incident reports going back decades. Names, dates, descriptions of events that sounded like they belonged in a horror movie. Each entry was written in different handwriting by different supervisors, but they all followed the same pattern. Workers who hadn't followed protocol all crossed out in red ink. Marcus Chen, September 2019, answered door during prohibited hours. Found deceased 2 miles into forest, no tracks leading to location. Tommy Reed, July 2020, pursued what appeared to be injured animal past camp boundaries. Vehicle found abandoned at forest edge. Driver never recovered. Jennifer Walsh, November 2021, opened window during auditory phenomena, subsequently disappeared from locked room. No signs of forced entry or exit. Page after page of names, each one representing someone who'd thought they knew better than the rules. The company tried shutting this place down 3 times. Jasmine continued. Each time those things followed workers home, went after their families. So we keep the camp running, keep the rules in place, and try to maintain some kind of balance. Balance with what? Something that feeds on human curiosity, something that uses familiar shapes and voices to draw people past the boundaries we've established. She closed the ledger and looked at me directly. The rules aren't just guidelines, Carl. They're a peace treaty written in blood. I thought about the voice that had sounded exactly like Mike, how it had known just what to say to make me want to open that door. How does it know things, personal details, voices? We're not sure. Maybe it reads memories. Maybe it's been watching us longer than we realize. Jasmine shrugged. What matters is that the rules work. Follow them exactly and you go home with all your pieces intact. Dawn was starting to creep through the office windows. Gray light that made everything look washed out and tired. Jasmine stretched and began shutting down her computer systems. Shift change in an hour. You should probably go see what's left of your room. I walked back to Building C as the morning crew started their routines. Normal people doing normal work like nothing had happened. My door hung at an angle, held up by one hinge and a prayer. The frame was completely destroyed. Deep claw marks carved into the wood and drywall. Inside, my room looked like a tornado had hit it. The mattress was torn to shreds, stuffing scattered everywhere. Claw marks covered the walls, gouged so deep they went through the drywall into the insulation. My dresser was overturned, clothes scattered, but nothing was missing. Whatever had done this hadn't been looking for anything to steal. A maintenance truck pulled up outside, and 2 workers climbed out with tool bags and building materials. They took one look at the damage and got to work without a single question, like they'd done this 100 times before. How long until it's fixed? I asked the older guy, who was already measuring the door frame. Few hours. We'll have you a new room ready by lunch. He didn't seem surprised or curious about what had caused the damage. Just another Tuesday morning repair job. I gathered what was left of my belongings and walked to the cafeteria, where the breakfast crowd was already gathering. Doris and Jasper sat at their usual table, and I joined them with a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs I wasn't sure I could eat. Rough night? Doris asked, taking in my appearance. Something tried to get into my room. Sounded like Mike, asking me to come to an emergency meeting. Jasper nodded like this was perfectly normal conversation. Good thing you went out the window. How did you know that's what I did? Because you're sitting here talking to us instead of being another name in Jasmine's book. Doris cut into her toast with surgical precision. The ones who open their doors don't usually make it back for breakfast. I stared at my eggs, thinking about all those crossed-out names in the ledger. People who'd made one wrong choice and paid for it with everything. How do you live with this? Knowing what's out there? Same way you live with anything dangerous, Jasper said. You learn the rules, you follow them exactly, and you don't get curious about things that want to kill you. The rules work, Doris added. They're not perfect and they don't explain everything, but they keep us alive. That's enough. I spent the rest of the day working on routine maintenance, checking my watch every few minutes and staying well clear of the forest edge. By evening, maintenance had finished with my room. New door, new frame, fresh drywall and paint. Like nothing had ever happened. The replacement mattress felt different, firmer somehow, but I was grateful to have a place to sleep. I placed the rule sheet on my nightstand and read through it one more time before turning off the lights. Outside my new window, the forest was quiet. No crying sounds, no mysterious whistles, just the ordinary darkness of a place where extraordinary rules applied. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new tests of my ability to follow instructions that had been written in other people's blood. The rules weren't suggestions or hazing rituals. They were survival instructions for a war most people didn't even know was being fought. I grabbed my thermos and tool bag, trying not to think about how the late shift always felt different. The camp's daytime rhythms, engine noise, radio chatter, the ordinary sounds of people working, all faded after dark, leaving something else in their place. Something that made every shadow look deeper and every sound carry farther than it should. Doris was already waiting by the maintenance shed when I got there, checking her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that overlooked details could kill you. "Pipeline inspection tonight," she said without looking up. "Pressure readings along the north fence line. Should take us about 3 hours if everything's running normal. And if it's not, then we fix it and pretend we didn't see whatever made it break." She shouldered her tool bag and started walking toward the fence. "Stay close and keep your mouth shut. Night shift rules are different." We followed the pipeline markers through the equipment yard, past the generator building, toward the section that ran closest to the forest. The work lights cast everything in harsh white, creating pockets of brightness separated by walls of absolute black. Beyond the fence, the trees pressed close enough that branches scraped against the chain link when the wind picked up. The first 3 pressure stations checked out normal. Numbers within acceptable range, no signs of leakage or equipment failure. Routine work that should have been boring, except for the way Doris kept glancing toward the tree line like she was expecting something. "You seem jumpy tonight," I said, recording the readings from Station 4. "Not jumpy, careful." She moved to the next gauge, flashlight beam dancing across the metal housing. "October's when they get more active. Something about the temperature drop maybe, or just the longer nights." "They?" Doris didn't answer immediately. She finished her reading, made a note on her clipboard, then looked directly at me. The ones who didn't follow the rules. Station 5 sat maybe 20 yards from the fence, close enough that I could see individual branches through the chain link. The pressure reading was slightly low. Nothing critical, but worth investigating. I knelt beside the gauge housing, checking for loose connections. That's when Doris grabbed my arm. "Don't move," she whispered. "Don't look up fast. Just keep working and listen to me." My hand stayed steady on the gauge, but every muscle in my body went tight. "What is it?" "Past the fence, about 30 feet into the trees. Count of 3. Look up slowly like you're checking something normal." I finished tightening a connection that didn't need tightening, then raised my head at the speed of someone who was just doing their job. 7 figures stood among the trees, perfectly still and staring directly at us. They wore work clothes, hard hats, safety vests, steel-toed boots. But something was wrong with the uniforms. The colors were faded, styles that looked decades out of date. One guy wore coveralls with a company logo I didn't recognize. Another had a safety vest that was bright orange instead of the standard yellow-green we use now. But it was their faces that made my skin crawl. Blank expressions, eyes that caught the work lights and reflected them back like mirrors. They stood in a perfect line, spaced exactly the same distance apart, not moving even when the wind shook the branches around them. "Keep working," Doris murmured. "Act like you don't see them." I forced my attention back to the pressure gauge, hands shaking slightly as I checked readings that were perfectly fine. What are they? Workers who broke the rules. Tommy Reed, third from the left, went after what he thought was a hurt dog 3 years ago. Her voice stayed level, professional. Marcus Chen, far right, answered his door during prohibited hours. Sarah Winters, second from left, followed whistling sounds past the fence line. The figures started moving, not walking exactly, more like gliding between the trees, staying in perfect formation. They moved parallel to the fence, keeping pace with us as we worked our way down the pipeline. "They're copying us," I said. "Always do. Mirror whatever the living workers are doing, like they're trying to remember how to be human." Doris finished her reading and moved to the next station. The figures moved too, maintaining their position relative to us. "Don't make eye contact. Don't acknowledge them directly. Just do the job." Station 6, 7, 8. The readings were all normal, but I barely registered the numbers. The figures followed us the entire way, their movements becoming more synchronized as we progressed. When I knelt, they knelt. When Doris raised her flashlight, they raised their hands in unison. At Station 9, one of them stepped closer to the fence. The guy Doris had identified as Tommy Reed moved forward until he was pressed against the chain link, fingers threaded through the metal mesh. Up close, I could see his face more clearly. Pale skin with a waxy texture, eyes that were definitely human but somehow empty. His mouth moved like he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. "Ignore him," Doris said firmly. "He's been trying to get someone's attention for 3 years. Don't give it to him." But Tommy's mouth kept moving, and I found myself trying to read his lips. The same word over and over, desperate and pleading, "Help." "Doris, he's asking for help. He's asking for company." Her voice got harder. "That's what they do. Act like they need rescue, like they're still the people they used to be. But they're not. There's something else wearing familiar faces." Tommy pressed his face against the fence, mouth still forming that silent word. Behind him, the other figures had moved closer, creating a line of watchers just beyond the tree line, all of them staring at us with those empty, reflective eyes. I finished the reading and stood up, fighting every instinct that told me to respond to Tommy's plea. The figures followed our movement, rising in perfect unison like a choreographed dance. "How many are there?" I asked as we moved to the final station. 43 documented disappearances since operations began. Not all of them come back to the fence, but enough do. Doris checked her watch. "We're almost done. Stay focused." The last pressure reading was normal, but as I packed up my tools, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The figures weren't just copying our movements anymore. They were anticipating them. When I reached for my wrench, they reached for tools that weren't there. When Doris turned toward the main compound, they turned the same direction a split second before she moved. "They're learning," I said. Doris followed my gaze, watching the figures mirror our preparation to leave. "They remember more each time. Company thinks they're trying to figure out how to get back inside the fence, back to the world of the living. What happens if they do? That's why we have the rules. That's why we follow them exactly." She started walking back toward the main compound, not looking at the figures anymore. The fence isn't just to keep us in. It's to keep them out. We walked back through the equipment yard in silence, past the generator building, toward the lights of the main compound. Behind us, I could feel those empty eyes tracking our movement, but I didn't look back. The night supervisor's office was warm and bright after the cold darkness of the pipeline route. Jasmine looked up from her computer as we walked in, took one look at our faces and reached for the coffee pot. "Rough patrol?" "The usual," Doris said, but her hands were shaking slightly as she filled out the inspection report. I sat down across from Jasmine's desk, still trying to process what I'd seen. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends what you want to know." "Those missing workers, the ones in the official reports, how many really just quit and left?" Jasmine stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She glanced at Doris, who nodded slightly. "None of them," Jasmine said quietly. "Not a single one." She turned her monitor so I could see the screen. Personnel files, dozens of them, each marked with a red stamp that read, "Resigned, no forwarding address." Tommy Reed, equipment operator. Last seen pursuing what appeared to be an injured animal past camp boundaries. Vehicle found abandoned at Forest Edge. She clicked to the next file. Marcus Chen, general laborer, failed to respond to wellness check after reporting persistent knocking at quarters. Room found empty. No signs of struggle. File after file. The same pattern. Workers who'd broken one rule too many, officially listed as resignations but never seen again. The company knows? The company pays us to maintain production quotas and keep the paperwork clean. Jasmine's voice was flat, professional. Everything else is just operational challenges. She pulled up another document, this one marked with security classifications I didn't recognize. Internal memo from 1987. Research Division wanted to study the phenomena, figure out ways to control or weaponize it. 3 separate teams went into the forest with full equipment and military backup. What happened to them? They became part of the phenomena. 47 additional figures walking the fence line, all wearing military gear. Jasmine closed the file. Company decided containment was more cost-effective than conquest. I thought about Tommy Reed pressing his face against the fence, mouth forming that silent plea for help. Are they still them? The missing workers? That's the wrong question, Doris said from across the room. Better question is whether it matters. They're gone, and we're still here. That's what counts. But I couldn't shake the image of those empty eyes, the desperate way Tommy had tried to communicate. Somewhere in that thing wearing his face, was there still a piece of the man who'd chased a hurt dog into the woods? The rules exist because of them, Jasmine continued. Every prohibition, every warning, represents someone who learned the hard way what happens when you get curious about the wrong things. Trial and error written in blood, I said, remembering Jasper's words. Exactly. And the error part killed people. She turned back to her computer. The forest feeds on human curiosity, uses familiar shapes to draw people past the boundaries we've established. The missing workers are part of that now, bait to catch the next person who thinks they know better than the rules. The rest of my shift passed quietly. I helped Doris finish the maintenance reports, checked equipment readings, did all the ordinary work that kept the camp running. But I couldn't stop thinking about those figures in the forest, the way they'd moved in perfect synchronization. Dawn was starting to show through the office windows when I finally headed back to Building C. The forest looked ordinary in the early light, just trees and shadows without any sign of the watchers who'd followed us along the fence. My room felt smaller when I got back, the walls pressing closer than they should. I sat on my bed and pulled out the rule sheet, reading through each line with new understanding. Every prohibition represented multiple deaths, people who'd thought they could handle whatever the wilderness threw at them. I was almost asleep when the voices started. Soft at first, barely audible over the morning sounds of the camp waking up, then clearer, more distinct. Multiple voices calling my name from different directions outside my window. "Carl?" A man's voice, unfamiliar but desperate. "Carl, help me." Carl Cook, a woman this time, younger. "Please, I'm lost." "Carl." A third voice, one I recognized. Tommy Reed, the same tone he'd probably used when he was alive and needed help with something. "Carl, come outside." More voices joined in, creating a chorus of pleas and requests. Some belonged to people I'd met at the camp, workers from the day shift, kitchen staff, even Mike's voice asking me to come to an emergency meeting. Others were strangers, but they all sounded desperate, frightened, like they needed rescue. I pulled my pillow over my head and pressed it against my ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside the room now. Whispers that promised answers, explanations, solutions to all the questions that kept me awake at night. The voices continued until sunrise, when they faded away like they'd never existed. But I knew they'd be back. Tonight, tomorrow night, every night until I either learned to ignore them completely or made the same mistake as the 43 workers who'd walked into the forest and never come back. I finally understood why the turnover rate stayed so high despite the excellent pay. It wasn't just the isolation or the dangerous work. It was the constant temptation to break the rules, to investigate the mysteries that surrounded us, to help the voices that called for rescue in the darkness. The forest was patient. It could wait for curiosity to overcome caution, for compassion to override common sense. And when it finally got what it wanted, it added another voice to the chorus that called out to the next worker who thought they were strong enough to resist. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new tests of my ability to follow instructions written in other people's blood. The rules weren't just survival guidelines. They were the only thing standing between the living and the hungry darkness that waited just beyond the fence. The whole thing started going sideways the moment Kyle Daniels walked into the cafeteria that morning, looking like he owned the place and everyone in it was there for his entertainment. I was finishing my coffee when he dropped into the chair across from me, all confidence and white teeth. "So, you're the guy everyone says knows the score around here." "Depends what score you're talking about." Kyle leaned back, arms crossed. "The bullshit rules, the ghost stories. Come on, man, you seem too smart to buy into that crap." I set my cup down carefully. "You read the rules yet?" "Read them, laughed at them, used the paper to wrap my gum." He grinned like this was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. "Crying sounds from the forest? Don't acknowledge weird animals? What is this? Summer camp for scared children." Doris looked up from her breakfast 2 tables over. Her expression could have frozen diesel fuel. "Those rules keep people alive," I said. "Those rules keep people paranoid." Kyle pulled out a pack of cigarettes and started tapping it against the table. "I grew up hunting with my dad. Been in the woods since I could walk. Whatever's out there, I can handle it." "Your dad ever hunt anything that hunted back?" That got a laugh. Everything hunts back if you're doing it right. I tried for 20 minutes to explain why the rules mattered, why following them exactly was the difference between going home and becoming another name in Jasmine's ledger. Kyle nodded along like he was humoring a slow child, then stood up and stretched. "Thanks for the pep talk, but I think I'll trust my own judgment." He headed for the door, then turned back. "Oh, and I'm keeping my window open tonight. This place smells like diesel and fear." He walked out before I could respond, leaving me staring at my coffee and wondering how many different ways someone could die from being that stupid. Mike found me at the equipment shed an hour later, going through maintenance logs and trying not to think about Kyle's cocky smile. "Heard you talk to the new guy," Mike said. "Tried to. He thinks the rules are a joke." "They always do." Mike leaned against the workbench, looking older than his 48 years. Question is whether he'll figure it out before something figures him out first. What if he doesn't? Then we'll have another incident report to file and another empty room to clean. Mike's voice was flat, matter of fact. Can't save people from themselves, Carl. Best we can do is try. The day dragged. Every time I saw Kyle around the camp, he was doing something that made my teeth itch. Whistling while he worked near the forest edge. Making jokes about mysterious animal behavior when a crow landed too close to the equipment. Acting like the whole place was his personal adventure playground. By evening, I was ready to pack my truck and start my 2 weeks off early. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Dinner was quiet. Kyle sat by himself, still radiating that same bulletproof confidence. Jasper and Doris ate without talking, both of them shooting glances toward the new guy like they were watching a bomb with a faulty timer. "Think he'll last the night?" Doris asked quietly. "Depends how stupid he really is," Jasper replied. Turned out we didn't have to wait long to find out. I was in my room around 9:30, packing the last of my gear for tomorrow's departure when I heard Kyle's window slide open across the courtyard. His room was on the second floor of Building B, directly across from my ground floor window in Building C. Perfect view of whatever dumbass thing he was about to do. He stuck his head out and lit a cigarette, blowing smoke into the night air like he was marking territory. The forest edge was maybe 40 yards from his building, close enough that I could see branches moving in the wind. The crying started at 10 p.m. sharp, soft at first, like it always was. A child's voice, lost and scared, calling for help from somewhere in the trees. I closed my window immediately and pulled the curtains, but I could still see Kyle's room through a gap in the fabric. The idiot was leaning out his window, cigarette dangling from his lips, listening to the crying like it was a radio show. When the voice got closer, more desperate, he actually cupped his hand around his ear. "Hey," he called out. "You okay out there?" The crying stopped. Dead silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then it started again. Closer now. Definitely closer. Moving through the trees toward Kyle's building with purpose that made my skin crawl. Kyle flicked his cigarette into the darkness and leaned farther out the window. "I can help you. Just tell me where you are." That's when I saw it. Something small and pale moving between the trees, just at the edge of the work light's reach. It looked like a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing what might have been a white nightgown. The thing moved wrong, though, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. Kyle saw it too. He pointed and called out, "There you are! Hold on, I'm coming down!" The pale figure stopped moving and turned toward his voice. Even from my window, I could see its face wasn't right. Too long, too narrow, with dark holes where its eyes should be. Kyle disappeared from his window. 30 seconds later, I watched him emerge from Building B's side door, jogging toward the forest edge like he was heading to help a neighbor change a tire. The pale thing waited until he was halfway across the open ground. Then it started moving again. Not running exactly, more like flowing between the trees, always staying just visible enough to keep Kyle following. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, then stopped. Rule 1. Do not leave camp boundaries between midnight and 3 a.m. It was only 10:15, but Kyle was already past the fence line, chasing something that definitely wasn't a lost child. By the time I reached the courtyard, Kyle had disappeared into the forest. The pale figure was gone too, but I could hear crashing sounds in the underbrush, getting farther away. Then Kyle screamed. Not a yell or a shout, a scream of pure terror that cut through the night like a blade. It went on for maybe 5 seconds, then stopped so abruptly it left my ears ringing. I ran toward the fence, pulling out my phone to call the night supervisor. The forest edge looked normal, just trees and shadows, and the ordinary darkness of a place where extraordinary things lived. "Jasmine? It's Carl. We've got a problem." Within minutes, the whole camp was awake. Work lights blazed across the compound while Mike organized a search party. Jasper and Doris joined me at the fence line, staring into the trees where Kyle had vanished. "How long?" Jasper asked. "Maybe 10 minutes since he went in. 5 since the screaming stopped." "Then he's gone." Doris's voice was flat. "Whatever got him is probably already done." Mike's search team found Kyle's cigarette lighter about 20 yards into the forest, dropped beside a game trail that led deeper into the trees. No other sign of him. No tracks, no torn clothing, no blood. Just the lighter, and the kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. They called off the search after 2 hours. Protocol said no one went more than 50 yards past the fence line, and they'd already pushed that boundary farther than was safe. I was walking back to my room when Jasmine grabbed my arm. "Security footage," she said. "You need to see this." Her office felt smaller, with half the camp crammed inside, watching the monitor as she pulled up the exterior cameras. Building B, angle 3, showing Kyle's window and the courtyard below. 10:07 p.m., Jasmine said, pointing at the timestamp. Kyle opens his window. There he was, leaning out with his cigarette, looking relaxed and confident. 10:10 p.m., crying sounds begin, though the cameras don't pick up audio. Kyle's posture changed on screen, head tilted like he was listening to something. 10:12 p.m., Kyle calls out to the forest. We watched him cup his hand around his ear, mouth moving as he shouted into the darkness. 10:14 p.m., Kyle leaves the window. The frame showed his window empty, curtains fluttering in the night breeze. 10:15 p.m., Kyle exits Building B and approaches the fence. There he was, jogging across the courtyard like he didn't have a care in the world. 10:16 p.m., Kyle crosses the fence line and enters the forest. The camera showed him disappearing between the trees, following something the camera couldn't see. 10:21 p.m., Kyle's scream is detected by audio sensors. Jasmine switched to a different camera angle, one that covered more of the forest edge. The timestamp showed 10:21:33 when a shape came flying out of the trees. Kyle's body moving through the air like it had been thrown by something incredibly strong. He hit a tree trunk about 30 feet from the fence and dropped to the ground, motionless. "Jesus," someone whispered behind me. But Jasmine wasn't done. She advanced the footage frame by frame, showing Kyle's body lying crumpled at the base of the tree. Then, at 10:21:47, something grabbed his ankles and dragged him back into the forest. The camera couldn't see what was doing the dragging. Kyle's body just slid across the ground and disappeared between the trees, pulled by invisible hands. "That's the last footage we have of him," Jasmine said quietly. The room was dead silent. Even Mike looked shaken, and he'd seen this kind of thing before. "So he's definitely dead," someone said. "Probably," Mike replied. "But we follow lockdown protocol anyway. Everyone stays in the main building until dawn." The next few hours crawled by like a wounded animal. The main building had a rec room with couches and vending machines, designed for exactly this kind of situation. Workers sat around in small groups, playing cards or watching TV with the volume turned low. Nobody talked about what we'd seen on the security footage. I was dozing in one of the chairs when Doris shook my shoulder. "Where's Jasper?" I looked around the room, counting faces. Jasper's wasn't among them. "Bathroom?" I suggested. "Checked. He's not there." Doris's face was tight with worry. "Mike's doing a head count. Jasper's missing." We found Mike in the hallway, going through his roster with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before. "When did anyone last see him?" Mike asked. "Maybe an hour ago," someone said. "He was by the coffee machine." "I saw him walking toward the back exit," another worker added. "Thought he was going to smoke." Mike's expression went grim. The back exit led to the equipment shed, which was technically still within camp boundaries but isolated from the main building. "Lockdown means everyone stays here," Mike said. No exceptions. So we just leave him out there? Doris's voice carried an edge that could cut glass. We follow protocol. Jasper knows the rules better than anyone. If he's out there, he had a reason. But I could see the doubt in Mike's eyes. Good reasons for leaving the main building during lockdown were hard to come by. 20 minutes later, Doris found me by the window that faced the equipment shed. "I can see the shed from here," she said. "Lights on inside." I pressed my face against the glass, trying to make out details in the darkness. The shed was maybe 100 yards away, connected to the main building by a gravel path that passed through 2 pools of light from security lamps. "There," Doris pointed, "by the shed door." A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the interior light. Too far away to make out features, but the size and posture looked like Jasper. "What's he doing?" "Looks like he's talking to someone." I squinted, trying to see what Jasper was looking at. Then another figure moved into view, smaller than Jasper, approaching from the direction of the forest. "Who is that?" Doris was quiet for a long moment, studying the distant figures. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Looks like a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old." My blood went cold. "Jasper's daughter lives in Vancouver." "I know." We watched as the small figure gestured for Jasper to follow. He stepped out of the shed doorway and started walking slowly toward the forest edge, the childlike shape leading him away from the lights. "We have to stop him," I said. "Mike will never let us leave the building." "Then we don't ask permission." I was already moving toward the back exit when Doris caught my arm. "Carl, if we go out there and something happens to us, who's going to help Jasper? If we stay here and something happens to him, who's going to live with that?" She stared at me for a few seconds, then nodded. "Equipment room. There should be flare guns in the emergency kit." The equipment room was down a hallway that smelled like cleaning supplies and old coffee. Emergency kits hung on the wall in bright red cases, clearly marked and easily accessible. I grabbed a flare gun and a handful of flares while Doris found a heavy-duty flashlight. "You know this is probably going to get us both killed," she said. "Probably. And if we survive, Mike's going to fire us." "Definitely." She grinned, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. Good. I was getting bored anyway. The back exit opened onto a loading dock that faced the equipment shed. From here, I could see Jasper more clearly. He was about 50 yards from the shed now, walking steadily toward the forest edge. The small figure stayed just ahead of him, always visible but never close enough to touch. "Jasper," I called out, trying to keep my voice low enough not to attract attention from inside the building. He didn't respond, didn't even turn his head, just kept walking like he couldn't hear anything except whatever the child thing was saying to him. Doris and I ran across the open ground, our footsteps loud on the gravel path. The security lights created pools of harsh white separated by walls of black shadow. Every time we passed through darkness, I expected something to grab us. We caught up to Jasper when he was maybe 20 yards from the forest edge. Up close, I could see his face clearly. His eyes were open, but unfocused, like he was sleepwalking. His mouth moved constantly, carrying on a conversation with someone only he could see. "Jasper!" Doris grabbed his arm. "What are you doing out here?" He turned toward us, but his gaze went right through us like we weren't there. "She needs help," he said in a voice that sounded nothing like him. Flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. "My little girl needs help. She's lost in the woods." "Your daughter is in Vancouver," I said. "This isn't her. She's scared. She can't find her way home." Jasper pulled free from Doris's grip and started walking again. "I have to help her." The child figure had stopped at the forest edge, waiting patiently for Jasper to catch up. From this distance, I could see it more clearly. It wore what looked like a white dress, and its hair hung long and straight. But something was wrong with its proportions. The arms were too long, the head too large for the body. "Jasper, look at me." I stepped in front of him, forcing him to stop. "That's not your daughter. That's not even human." For a moment, his eyes seemed to focus on my face. Recognition flickered there, like he was trying to remember who I was. Then the thing at the forest edge spoke. "Daddy?" Its voice carried clearly across the distance, high and sweet and absolutely heartbreaking. "Daddy, please help me. I'm so scared." Jasper's face went blank again. He pushed past me and continued walking toward the trees. I raised the flare gun and fired. The flare burst between Jasper and the child thing, casting everything in harsh red light. The creature flinched back from the brightness, and for just a second, I saw its true face. Not a child at all. The features shifted and flowed like smoke, sometimes human, sometimes something else entirely. Its mouth opened too wide, showing rows of teeth that belonged on something that lived in deep water. Jasper stumbled, shaking his head like he was waking up from a dream. "What? Where am I?" "You're safe," Doris said, grabbing his arm. "But we need to get back to the building, now." The flare was already burning out, red light fading to orange to nothing. In the returning darkness, I could see more shapes moving between the trees. Lots more. "Run," I said. We made it maybe halfway back to the building before the whistling started. Multiple sources coming from different directions around the forest edge. The sound was coordinated, musical, like a choir of something that had learned human melodies but didn't understand what they meant. "Don't listen to it," Jasper gasped as we ran. He was fully awake now, his face pale with terror. "Don't respond. Don't look back." The whistling got louder, closer. In my peripheral vision, I caught glimpses of shapes moving parallel to our path. Tall figures that walked wrong, staying just outside the security light's reach. We reached the loading dock and dove through the back exit, slamming the door behind us. The lock clicked into place with a sound like salvation. Inside the building, alarms were going off. Red emergency lights flashed in the hallways, and I could hear Mike's voice over the intercom system. "All personnel to the main rec room immediately. This is not a drill. Lockdown protocol is now in effect." We found the rec room in chaos. Workers pressed against the windows, staring out at the forest edge, where dozens of shapes moved between the trees. The things were testing the fence line, probing for weak spots or gaps in the boundary. Mike saw us come in and his face went dark. "Where the hell have you three been?" "Equipment shed," I said. "Jasper was... I don't care what Jasper was doing. Nobody leaves this room until dawn. Is that clear?" Before I could answer, something heavy slammed into the building's exterior wall. The impact shook the entire structure, rattling windows and making the lights flicker. Then another impact, from a different direction, and another. "They're testing the building," Jasmine said from her position at the security monitors, looking for ways in. The attacks continued for the next hour, rhythmic pounding against walls, doors, windows. Sometimes the sounds moved around the building in patterns, like multiple creatures were coordinating their assault. Other times, everything would go quiet for minutes at a time before resuming with renewed violence. "This happen often?" I asked Mike during one of the quiet periods. "Only when someone breaks multiple rules in a short time frame." His voice was grim. Kyle ignored the crying sounds, left his window open, went past the fence line. That weakened whatever keeps them contained. "Contained how?" "We're not sure. The rules work, but we don't know why. Something about following them exactly maintains a barrier between the camp and whatever lives in that forest." Another impact shook the building, this one hard enough to crack a window. "How long does this usually last?" "Until dawn. They always pull back when the sun comes up." I checked my watch. 3 more hours until sunrise. 3 more hours of listening to things that shouldn't exist, trying to break down our walls. The attacks reached their peak around 4 a.m. Every window rattled, every door shook in its frame. The sounds were coordinated now, coming in waves that built to crescendos before falling back to silence. During one particularly violent assault, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Voices calling from outside. Familiar voices asking to be let in. Kyle's voice, pleading for help. Jenny Walsh, Jasper's former roommate. Marcus Chen and Tommy Reed and all the others whose names filled Jasmine's ledger. Please. Kyle's voice called through the walls. I'm hurt. I need help. Just open the door. It's not him, Mike said firmly. Whatever's out there, it's not Kyle. But the voice was perfect, exactly right down to the slight Edmonton accent and the cocky tone that had annoyed me so much during dinner. Carl? Kyle's voice called out, specifically addressing me. Carl, I know you can hear me. Please, man, I'm bleeding. I just need someone to open the door. I found myself taking a step toward the exit before Doris grabbed my arm. It's not him, she said. Kyle's dead. You saw the footage. But what if... No. Her grip was iron strong. That's how they get you. They make you doubt, make you think maybe this time is different. It never is. The voices continued until dawn, cycling through every worker who'd ever gone missing from the camp. They knew names, personal details, inside jokes. They sounded exactly like the people they claimed to be. But they weren't. They were just echoes, recordings played back by something that fed on human compassion and curiosity. When the sun finally came up, the attacks stopped as abruptly as they'd begun. The forest edge looked normal again, just trees and shadows and the ordinary wilderness of a place where extraordinary things waited for night to fall. Mike organized search teams to check the perimeter, looking for damage or signs of what had tried to break in. They found deep gouges in the building's exterior walls, claw marks that went through metal siding into the structural supports, but no other evidence of what had made them. Kyle's body was never found. The search teams went as far into the forest as protocol allowed, but they came back empty-handed. Whatever had taken him had left no trace. I spent the rest of the morning finishing my packing, trying not to think about Kyle's confident smile or the way his voice had sounded calling for help through the walls. Tomorrow, I'd drive back to Calgary, back to a world where the worst things that happened could be explained by ordinary human stupidity. But I knew I'd be back. The camp had gotten into my blood, become part of who I was. The rules weren't just survival instructions anymore. They were a responsibility, a burden shared by everyone who understood what lived in the forest and what it took to keep it contained. Jasper found me loading my truck around noon. He looked older, worn down by his close call with whatever had been wearing his daughter's face. "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming after me. Anyone would have done the same." No, they wouldn't have. He was quiet for a moment, staring at the forest edge. That thing knew exactly what to show me. My daughter's face, her voice. Even knew about the scar on her knee from when she fell off her bike. How is that possible? I don't know, but it felt real. More real than anything else in the world. He shook his head. "If you hadn't fired that flare, you'd have figured it out eventually. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be another name in Jasmine's book." Jasper extended his hand. "Take care of yourself out there. The real world's got its own dangers." I shook his hand and finished loading my gear. As I drove away from the camp, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary. The forest fell behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me go. The rules were in my jacket pocket, folded and worn from handling. I'd read them so many times I could recite them from memory, but they weren't just words on paper anymore. They were hard-won knowledge, survival instructions written in the blood of people like Kyle Daniels who'd thought they knew better. The camp was behind me now, but it would never really be gone. It was part of me, woven into my understanding of how the world really worked. And in 2 weeks, I'd drive back up that gravel road, past the last gas station, into the place where ordinary rules didn't apply. Because someone had to. Someone had to follow the rules, maintain the barrier, keep the hungry darkness contained. And I'd learned enough to know that walking away wasn't really an option. The forest was patient. It could wait for me to come back. I grabbed my duffel bag and threw it into the truck bed with more force than necessary. 3 weeks of careful packing, and now I was just shoving everything in like I couldn't get out of here fast enough. Which wasn't entirely wrong. Mike's boots crunched on gravel as he walked over, carrying a manila envelope that looked official enough to contain either my final paycheck or my death certificate. Hard to tell which around here. Your pay and return date, he said, handing it over. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, like it was weighted with more than just money and paperwork. I tore it open. The check was bigger than I'd expected. Hazard pay, completion bonus. Something called retention incentive. The return date was circled in red, November 15th, 2 weeks from today. You made it through your first month, Mike continued, leaning against my truck bed like we were just having a normal conversation about normal work. That's something. Is it? Most people who survive the first 30 days stick around for years. Proves they can follow the rules. His dark eyes studied my face. Proves they understand what's at stake. I folded the paperwork and shoved it into my jacket pocket, next to the rule sheet that had become as much a part of me as my wallet. And the ones who don't survive? Mike's expression went serious in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. We tried shutting this place down 3 times. Each time those things followed workers home, went after their families. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, followed them home? Marcus Chen's brother found him hanging from a tree in his backyard in Vancouver. No ladder, no rope marks on the trunk. Just Marcus, 20 feet up, like something had placed him there. Mike pulled out a cigarette but didn't light it, just rolled it between his fingers. Tommy Reed's sister started hearing knocking at her door every night after he disappeared. Persistent knocking, just like Rule 3 warns about. She moved 3 times. The knocking followed her. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that wasn't coming. This camp isn't just about oil, Mike continued. We're keeping something contained. The work, the rules, the people who follow them. We're part of a barrier that keeps those things from spreading into the world. You're telling me I can't actually leave. You can leave. But once you know what we know, once you've been part of maintaining the containment. He shrugged. Distance doesn't mean safety. Not anymore. I climbed into my truck and started the engine, trying to process what he'd just told me. Through the windshield, I could see the forest edge, looking perfectly ordinary in the afternoon sunlight, just trees and shadows and the kind of wilderness that existed all over northern Alberta, except it wasn't ordinary. And now I was part of whatever kept it from being everyone else's problem. 2 weeks, Mike said, stepping back from the truck. Try to enjoy your time off. I drove away without looking back, but I could feel the forest watching me go. The highway stretched south through empty country, past abandoned farmhouses and rusted grain elevators that stood like monuments to better times. I kept the radio loud and the windows down, trying to fill the silence with something other than my own thoughts. 50 miles down the highway, I pulled into a gas station that looked like it had been built in the 70s and forgotten about ever since. The pumps were ancient. The building needed paint, and the attendant looked like he'd been working there since the place opened. He saw my work uniform while I was filling up and grinned like I'd just told him a good joke. You work at one of those camps? He gestured vaguely north. Heard some crazy stories about what goes on out there. Weird accidents, people going missing. My cousin's friend worked pipeline up that way. Said the whole crew was nuts, talking about monsters in the woods. I handed him cash for the gas. Just industrial work, nothing exciting. Come on, man. Everyone knows those remote sites are where the weird stuff happens. Government experiments, military testing, alien crash sites. His eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that came from watching too much late-night television. What's it really like? I looked at him. Middle-aged guy with grease under his fingernails and conspiracy theories for entertainment. and realized how completely alone I was with the truth. He wanted stories about aliens and government cover-ups because those were the kind of mysteries that had solutions. The real thing was something else entirely. "Just a job," I said, and walked back to my truck. Calgary felt like a foreign country after a month in the wilderness. Too many lights, too much noise, too many people who had no idea what lived in the dark spaces between cities. I drove through downtown, past office buildings and shopping centers and restaurants full of people living normal lives. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Small, clean, expensive enough to justify the work I'd been doing. I dropped my bag by the door and stood in the living room, trying to remember what I used to do with my time. The silence was wrong, too complete, too safe. I found myself listening for sounds that shouldn't be there, checking windows for movement that wouldn't come. I unpacked my clothes and put them in the hamper, then sat on my couch and stared at the television without turning it on. The rule sheet lay on my coffee table where I'd placed it, still folded and worn from handling. I'd read it maybe 100 times, but I picked it up anyway. Do not leave camp boundaries between midnight and 3 a.m. for any reason. Except I wasn't at camp anymore. The rule didn't apply here. None of them did. So why did I keep checking my watch as evening approached? Sarah called while I was heating up a frozen dinner that tasted like cardboard and regret. "You're back." Her voice carried the kind of enthusiasm that made me remember why I'd missed her. "How was the job? You sounded weird in your texts." "It was fine. Good money, interesting work." "Interesting how?" "You were pretty vague about what you were actually doing up there." I stirred my dinner and tried to think of something to say that wouldn't make me sound completely insane. Equipment maintenance, pipeline inspection, standard industrial stuff. "That's it? A month in the wilderness and that's all you got?" "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Adventure stories, wildlife encounters, at least some complaints about the food." She paused. "You seem different." "Different how?" "More, I don't know, nervous? Like you're waiting for something bad to happen." I caught myself checking the window again, though I couldn't explain why. Just tired. It was a long month. We talked for another 20 minutes about normal things, her job at the bank, her boyfriend's promotion, our parents' anniversary coming up. Ordinary conversation about an ordinary world where the worst things that happened could be explained by human stupidity or bad luck. When I hung up, the apartment felt even quieter than before. The first week passed in a blur of sleeping late and wandering around the city like a tourist in my own life. I went to movies, ate at restaurants, caught up with friends who wanted to hear about my wilderness adventure. I told them the same story I'd told Sarah: equipment maintenance, good pay, nothing exciting. Nobody believed me, but they stopped asking questions when they realized I wasn't going to give them anything better. The second week was harder. Every unexpected sound made me jump. Car doors slamming, dogs barking, kids playing in the courtyard. Normal city noises that shouldn't have bothered me, but did. I started checking my locks multiple times before bed, though I couldn't say what I was trying to keep out. On my 10th day off, Sarah came over with takeout Chinese food and the kind of determined expression that meant she wasn't leaving until we'd talked. "Okay, what's really going on?" she said, spreading containers across my kitchen table. "And don't tell me you're just tired. I've seen you tired. This is something else." I opened a container of sweet and sour pork and tried to think of an answer that wouldn't get me committed to a psychiatric facility. The job was more intense than I expected. Intense how? Dangerous equipment, isolated location, strict safety protocols. All true, technically. It takes some getting used to. Sarah studied my face like she was reading a book written in a language she almost understood. "Are you going back?" "Yeah, November 15th. Do you want to go back?" That was the question I'd been avoiding for 10 days. Did I want to return to a place where following the wrong rules could get you killed? where things that shouldn't exist waited in the forest for people to make mistakes? The money's good, I said finally. That's not an answer. Before I could figure out what the real answer was, my phone rang. Unknown number with an Alberta area code. Carl? Jasmine's voice came through tired and strained. It's Jasmine Snyder from the camp. What's wrong? 2 new guys have already vanished. Arrived Monday, gone by Wednesday. Mike's pulling his hair out trying to find workers who understand the situation. She paused. They've doubled the pay for your return. Emergency rates. I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with growing concern. What happened to them? Same story as always. Thought the rules were bullshit, decided to prove how tough they were. One of them went after crying sounds. The other answered knocking during prohibited hours. Jasmine's voice got harder. We need people who know what they're doing, who understand why the rules matter. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Mike's getting pressure from corporate to shut down operations if he can't maintain minimum staffing levels. She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone and trying to ignore Sarah's questions about who that was and what kind of emergency required doubling my pay. I sat in my apartment afterward, checking my bank balance and thinking about mortgage payments. The retention bonus would cover 3 months of expenses, and the emergency rate would let me pay off my truck early. But I also thought about Jasper, Doris, and Jasmine still out there following the rules every single day, keeping something contained that wanted to spread into the world, protecting people who had no idea they needed protection. That night, I dreamed about the trees. I was walking through the forest, following a path that seemed familiar even though I'd never seen it before. The trees were wrong, too tall, too close together, with branches that moved without wind. Something was following me, staying just out of sight, matching my pace perfectly. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat, and immediately checked my bedroom window. It was open. I stared at the raised glass, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was certain I'd locked it before going to bed. I always locked it now, though I couldn't explain why. The window faced the courtyard, 3 stories up, with no fire escape or balcony access. Nothing had come inside. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, but the message was clear enough. Distance didn't mean safety. The next morning, I called Mike and confirmed my return date. His relief was obvious, even over the phone. Good. We'll have your room ready and a full briefing on the new safety protocols. He paused. Things have been getting worse since you left. More active, more aggressive. We need everyone we can get. I packed my truck that afternoon, loading the same gear I'd brought home 2 weeks earlier. The rule sheet went into my jacket pocket, worn soft from handling but still readable. The drive north felt different this time. Not like I was heading towards something unknown, but like I was returning to a place I understood. A place where I had a purpose beyond just collecting a paycheck. I stopped at the same gas station 50 miles from camp. The same attendant was working, and he recognized me immediately. You must be crazy going back to that place, he said, grinning like this was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. I nodded while I filled up my tank. Yeah, probably. But I kept driving, understanding now that some knowledge couldn't be forgotten, and some responsibilities couldn't be walked away from. The rules had become part of me, woven into my understanding of how the world really worked. The camp needed people who understood why they mattered. People who could follow instructions written in other people's blood without asking too many questions about why those instructions existed. The forest was patient. It could wait for curious people to make mistakes, for new workers to think they knew better than hard-won wisdom. But it would have to wait a little longer. I was going back.